Sarita Parikh.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning and good to have you here. How are you this morning?
It's Friday and it's September in Minnesota, which is the most beautiful month in Minnesota. I think it's like Hawaii outside. It's breezy and it's warm and it's beautiful. So I'm kind of on cloud nine.
I would agree. Now, Tim, you can't say that because you're not here this week.
No, I'm in Nashville, and so it's warm and breezy, but Hawaii is not coming to mind for me. Okay, Sarita, we're going to get started with a speed round.
Okay, great.
Would you prefer to live by the beach or the mountains?
Mountains.
Okay.
Coffee or tea?
Holy moly. Asking someone to choose between their children.
Gosh, this is usually not a difficult question for folks, but obviously.
I would say before 7 a.m. coffee and after 10 a.m. tea.
Okay, life without a mobile phone or life without a laptop?
Holy moly! These questions. Life without a mobile phone would be far more difficult.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Doing a podcast in a living room or via Zoom?
I would say living room because I listened to your podcast and I've heard about this dining room and it sounds beautiful. So I feel like after this, you guys should invite me over for tea and coffee and
coffee.
dining room. Yes.
Okay.
Well, Tim is not a coffee guy, so we might just have to do tea. Well, we could do both. I mean,
I feel like you're missing out on one of the great joys of life.
Okay,
Yes.
So knowledge for its own sake or knowledge for the purpose of earning a degree?
I'm a nerd. Knowledge for its own sake.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
So that leads into some of your work, your current work on working with GED students.
Yes. Yeah.
And could we start? So we're going to be talking about the GED quite a bit because it's really central to your work. So can we start? Could you give a definition for the listeners outside of the U.S., since about half of our listeners are outside of the U.S.? What is the GED and what does it mean sort of socially and academically in the world? Sure. And then we can talk about your work.
So the GED is a program for adults who didn't finish high school, and it's a path for them to earn their high school diploma. And our mission at the GED is it's of course to help people get their high school diplomas, but I think it goes far beyond that. It's actually to move more people out of poverty and into the middle class. And what's really interesting right now is that the labor market is really good. You don't need education. You don't need a high school diploma to get a job. If you want a job, you can get a job. The problem is that the wages are not family sustaining wages. So you can find work, but it's not work that will support your family. And in fact, there aren't a lot of opportunities without education. And so our mission is making sure is helping more people really build the skills they need for career and for college, not just for jobs. And that means critical thinking skills, digital literacy skills, problem solving skills. These are all skills that are foundational so that when you move into career, when you move into college, into post-secondary education, that you've got those foundational skills to be successful. And a few years ago, we overhauled the GED to align to those goals. So we really moved away from kind of rote learning, which has historically been the GED, maybe through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And we moved more towards these, 21st century workforce skills, knowledge economy. And when we did that, we really centralized the whole program. And we learned something really fascinating that we didn't know before. We learned that over 1 million people come into the GED world every year. And so that's through adult education classes that are federally funded. We work with state agencies, we work with public school systems all over the country. And so either people come into classrooms or they come in online through GED.com. And of those 1 million plus people, most of them don't take any material steps to earn their GED. They don't do anything. They don't do anything materially. And so for every person who earns their diploma, there are at least 2 or 3 people who don't take any material steps at all. And we didn't know that before. We had thought, for a long time, we sort of thought it was just this steady state of like people come in and they study, they go to class, they earn their diploma, and then they go on. And so that really opened our eyes to just how many people are interested and want it, but aren't making progress on their goals.
So Sarita, what would be a material step? What would be something that you would look to say there is a material step that they're moving forward to get their GED?
That's a great question. So maybe taking a practice question or taking a practice test or studying some of the topics. One of the things that we've learned that's really interesting is that people have, especially in the United States, there's a really significant fear of math. And so people will start with math and they'll do a few practice questions and then they're out. They're terrified.
I have that fear of math too.
You have that fear of math?
And for good reason.
Even after my PhD, it's still a part that, and I think I'm joking, right, to a certain degree, but I think that's very true. I think we tend to have this, and I think Thaler and Kahneman talk about some of that, the inability for people, adults, regardless of educational component, to be able to really do math easy for the most part, right? Particularly once it gets past some of the simpler functions. Statistics, probabilities, those types of things don't come as naturally to us as maybe language acquisition and various different other pieces of it. So I can understand where that fear is probably very powerful, particularly for those who haven't necessarily had success in the past around that or around education in general. So
Right. That's right. I will say it's different for our kids today because Carol Dweck's workaround mindset.
Yes.
Almost all math curriculum in public schools today talk about strategies. So, when we learned math, we sort of learned, here's how you do it. Here's how you do long division. Here's how you do prime factors or whatever. Now it's amazing how, when kids are sort of left to be able to sort of sort through different approaches on their own, you see how different brains work. It's really fascinating. So hopefully that math thing is something that sort of fades away.
I'm sorry to interrupt. That will be interesting. So I went last night. My son had his class or school had a walk in their shoes thing, and so you went to their advisory course, and you got 10 minutes there, and then 10 minutes the next one. So we went to his math class, and he's in an accelerated math program and various different things. But what was really interesting is up around the room there were these green laminated sheets that I was like looking at them. My wife pointed them out to me, and I go, "Oh my gosh, this is Carol Dweck. This is all this thing." I thought math is hard. I can change that to, if I work on some problems, I'll get to it. I'm misquoting these, but they were all over the classroom. All of these elements of looking at a growth mindset as opposed to that fixed mindset. And so hopefully you're right, Sarita. I think that, hopefully that is a learned component and not, some element within our DNA that is driving that math component.
I think the other thing that's fascinating about it is they don't just use the strategies, they actually explicitly talk about the strategies. They explicitly talk about, and this is actually something we do with the GD when we talk about what we do, very explicitly that perhaps your belief is X, but really you can shift your belief to Y. And, it's amazing that it's not just, you actually bring the meta piece in. You talk about that with your reader too. So it's amazing.
Yeah. So this is a huge gap, right? With 1 million people starting to get their diploma, the equivalent of their high school diploma every year, and a very small percentage ending up with it. What are the kinds of things that you're testing or trying, and what is your and your team's approach to solving this problem?
Well, so when we learned that statistic, that metric of over 1 million people coming in and only a few 100,000 earning their diplomas. Around the same time, we also started working with some of the country's biggest employers on an education benefit plan. So Walmart, KFC, Taco Bell, these very large employers. Because the labor market is so tight, or it's so competitive, many of them wanted to add this educational benefit. They wanted to help upskill their employees. And so we thought it was this incredible opportunity, both for the businesses, certainly for our organization, and also for employees. And we thought, okay, this is a way that you as an employee can be fully sponsored to work on your high school diploma and then find career opportunities beyond that. And so it was a model where we had the study plans, We had sort of everything was paid for. You had a coach who kind of guided you through the process and really helped you understand, like, where were you stuck? What did you need to do next? And because they had such big businesses sponsoring it, like for me, I just felt like I felt like we had these moments where I was going to be Oprah. It was going to be like, you get a GED and you get a GED. It was this incredible, like, it just felt like this incredible opportunity. And so we built this program, and I just want to point out, like, probably the biggest thing is that it was completely sponsored and completely free to the employee. And with thousands and thousands of people sign up, and of them, the persistence rates were really low. We had a lot of people drop out, and we had many people drop out, like, just immediately after even signing up. They didn't really engage at all. And we have these great coaches who are really warm and personable and have incredible empathy. Many of them have their own background in the GED world. Many of them are teachers. Many of them are people who actually have family members, spouses who went through the GED. And so it was this thing where it was like, what is going on? And I will say, for me at the time, like, my background is engineering. Like, my whole career has been about, like, teaching computers to talk to other computers and, making frameworks and all this kind of stuff. And so it was really eye-opening for me, and I think actually for many people in the corporate world, that, like, if somebody has this goal and you build this thing to help them achieve their goal, and then you take price out of it, you take, costs out of it, well, then it's a no-brainer. And in fact, it's not a no-brainer.
It's not. It's still a hugely high hurdle, right? Even
there's some other friction point that is impeding these people from moving on. Price was one potential that obviously wasn't as big a factor as maybe we thought to begin with.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So we started doing ethnographic research, and we started off with, like, okay, who is this population? And I will say again, like, we've worked with, for 70 years, the GED has been around for 75 years. So we worked with teachers, we worked with state agencies, we've worked with a lot of groups who work with students, but we ourselves as an organization had never actually done or hadn't done any recent research on, like, who are our population. So we did research. We started off with qualitative ethnographic research, and we talked to students all over the country. And we really wanted, of course, to understand the relationships to the GED. But more than that, we wanted to understand, their attitudes, their beliefs, their behaviors. What does a day look like? What were their aspirations? We just really wanted to build this holistic view of who they were. And we learned so much in that process. We learned how much we were operating by, frankly, me, I knew how much I was operating by stereotypes, and how much I think we organizationally operated that way. And I feel like with each of these interviews, there was this consistent theme where I felt like if you took this person and you put them in a completely different environment growing up, they would have had a completely different outcome. And I think before I did that research, before I was involved in that research, I used to believe, like, nature versus nurture. I used to believe nature. This is all about, your biology and your brain chemistry and, like, all those things. But I'm convinced that most of the people that we worked with were people who, if they grew up the way I grew up, or any of us grew up, the way our children grew up, they would have had completely different outcomes. They would have been your neighbors, and they would have been PTA people with you and your coworkers.
If the environment that they grew up in was different than what they experienced.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I will just say, one of the things that coming out of all that research, we learned quite a bit, and I could spend hours on that, but I am on a myth-busting mission to help people sort of reframe how they think about adults who didn't finish high school.
Well, let's talk about let's talk about those myths.
Okay.
That's a good tee up. Yeah.
There's 3 common myths. I think the first one is the stereotype of an adult who didn't finish high school. And so when I say that, probably this conjures your own cognitive biases, your own sort of perspective about who that is. What we learned is that the stereotypes are often wrong. Like, there definitely are people who fit the stereotype. But for every person like that, there's at least 2 or 3 people who, when you hear their background and you hear about why they left high school, it'll break your heart. Like, there are stories of people being bullied, where safety's at risk, where people are taking care of family members. And there were so many stories where you just like, I remember one that's seared in my brain of this boy who he was 19. He actually had earned his GED and was now in community college and was breezing through this information technology degree. But he said that when he was 7, his dad started calling him a loser. And his whole life, he was like his dad. Every time he would see his dad would just remind him what a loser he was. And like, I have 3 sons. My youngest is 8. And like, just even to this day, when I think about the idea of what would make a person call a 7-year-old a loser?
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Can't even imagine.
And what does that do to a person?
Well, we talk a lot, Tim and I, and about self-identity and self-schemas and the impact that a parent, not just a random person, not somebody that you can potentially discount and say, oh, they're just have some agenda or whatever it is, but a parent calling you a loser has to have a significant long-term impact on how your self-identity is formed. And thus, and I'm sure this point on this is really, you have to overcome so much more than just to get up to normal to even start to participate. So
yeah, to get to ground zero, it takes, I can't imagine the emotional fight, the sort of the battle that you have to wage with yourself to rid yourself of that image of dad called me a loser. That's just
yeah.
Okay.
And that was a pretty pervasive theme, that like people's beliefs, like people's beliefs were driving what was happening. Their capabilities were almost secondary. Like that actually takes me to my second myth. The
Great.
Second myth on the myth busting is this idea that people they don't understand the value of education. They're not smart enough, like that whole genre. And we found that qualitatively and quantitatively, we found that that's not true, that education is baked into the American ethos. Like that the relationship between education and success is just part of the American mindset. Like that's not something people contest. It's sort of, apple pie and motherhood kind of stuff. And so it's not about want or desire. It's about, how do you do it and whether you believe you can do it. And that's, I would say there's almost nothing more limiting than the belief piece. Yeah.
It reminds me of one of my first jobs out of college was selling, and the sales manager would say, whether you believe you can or you believe you can't, whether you believe you can or you believe you can't, you're right.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's so powerful. That's just so powerful. Yeah. So this sense of belief really plays into whether or not you're gonna make it happen or not.
Right.
Okay.
We found something that we call presumptive failure, and the idea, not every student has this, actually it's probably fewer than 30 or 40%, but this notion that failure is preordained, that whatever I do, I'm going to fail. And if I even try and I fail, that will be further proof that I'm a failure.
Yeah.
How do you overcome that at scale? Like, it's one thing, if you're in a classroom and you have a really wonderful teacher, teachers can have an incredible impact. We all know that. We also know that about 60% of students going through the GED program are people who don't want to go to class. These are people who are sort of self-sponsored. They're going on their own. And the question for us is always around influencing behavior at scale. And particularly with that mindset, it's very difficult to change that kind of mindset at scale.
Wow.
Well, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point, right? Because if you have this presumptive failure mentality, and it's 30 to 40% of the population.
Yeah, it is. It's disheartening. Yes.
I mean, that's a huge component of the population you have that, to your point, that they're going to be, there's confirmation bias in that belief then. And so the first setback is going to then, double down on that belief set that they're already holding. And so how have you, well, actually, let's get to the third myth.
Yes, thank you. And so Yeah, you're right about confirmation bias. We use that term all the time. The third one is the idea that the GED is kind of the easy path out, or it's sort of the shortcut. And what we found when we overhauled the whole program a few years ago, was that the shift to career and college skills, career and college readiness, and critical thinking skills, the efficacy and the outcomes have been incredible. So we are finding that almost half, about 45% of the people who earn their diplomas go on into post-secondary ed, so into vocational school, community college,
Wow.
four-year universities, in fact. And then, but even more than that, that 90% of them are persisting from semester to semester. And so that is the highest persistence rate of any demographic group. And so what we found that is just so equally as heartening as the disheartening things that we said before, what's so exciting is that people, like, in this process, they have a transformation about what they believe about themselves. And as you start to have success, success begets success. Mm-hmm. And this, there's so many beautiful quotes, like just really inspirational quotes of people who, like, what they believed before, and then going through this journey, and now what they believe they're capable of afterwards, and then having the courage to enroll into post-secondary ed when they're the first ones in their whole, history and their family has ever done that. It's amazing. Yeah. So, I feel like this easy path out, I mean, I feel like this is just an opportunity for people who, for whatever reason, the first time didn't work. And, it's just kind of a gift to be able to work on that.
So Sarita, when did the curriculum change? How many years ago was that?
In 2014. So okay. About 4 years ago.
4 or 5 years ago. Because I think, again, to many, again, myself included in this, is we have a perception of GED, and I don't know if it would be the easy way up, but of almost the lesser degree than actually even a high school diploma. And what I'm hearing is that is not the case, that this is a revamped program. Even if it wasn't in the past, it definitely now isn't, even more so. And some of the stats you gave are quite impressive. And so, that shift, hopefully, as you said, that myth will be busted. And so all of our listeners, make sure you transfer that out to your friends and neighbors, and make sure they tell their friends and neighbors. And soon we will have a changed ideal about what this stands for. So
we'll get our own Coleman's boat going here. We'll start pushing off the individual and hoping that we can make a change to the macro of the population.
That's right. I mean, one of the big goals is to destigmatize it, because I think, looking at it as a marker of fortitude and resilience rather than shame. And that is, that'll take time to change that. But I do think, at least anecdotally, we see that.
Yeah. So how's it going? I guess, how are you measuring your destigmatization? How are you currently measuring your success rates for persistence? And what kind of results are you seeing?
That's a great question. So we, in that corporate program that we have, that was our sort of playground for starting to use behavioral tactics. Okay. And I will just say, sort of, at this point, we've tripled persistence in that program. We actually have hit 3,000 graduates in that program. So we've seen really material success.
Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Thank you. And I think it was a great way for us to build credibility for behavioral science in our organization, because, the very definition of a nudge is that something that seems inconsequential, makes a big difference. Well, if you're going to your CEO and you're saying, here, I need a substantial amount of capital for investment for something that seems inconsequential, I mean, I wouldn't make that decision. Like I'm a reader, so I'd read just for fun, I read Thinking Fast and Slow and Nudge. All of these things were sort of just books of just, zeitgeisty kind of nerdy books. And so as I was looking at what we were facing as a business, and then this whole area of research, bringing it together and making the case was, I will say, one of my own professional highlights, just building credibility for an idea that just doesn't, maybe, if you're working with people who are finance people or traditional economists or engineers, it just doesn't seem like this is something you want to spend money on.
Well,
So,
yeah, go ahead, Kurt.
so we've had this conversation, Tim and I, because we work with inside the corporate world all the time, and we run into this exact issue. And I think some of our listeners probably are facing this exact issue. So help us understand, give us what you were able to do in order to get those executives who have that financial background mindset, who might not go, wait, you want to spend how much to do something that, as you said, seems inconsequential, but really has this outcome. So what were some of the methods that you used to help drive that change in their belief?
Yeah. Right, because they're comparing this against things that seem like significant revenue generators. And so here's this sort of in the clouds, mushy kind of thing versus something that's a real product. So, I mean, I think I will say, if I were in my CEO's shoes, I would have exactly the same questions. And so we were lucky because we were able to take this corporate program and just use that as a sandbox. And we were able to try all kinds of different ideas. Everything from removing friction and making it easy and making it convenient, into trying real nudges. And then we did quite a bit with the mindset work. We did a lot with trying to help people sort of really reposition how they think and really sort of focus on the non-cognitive pieces, because that is, in my mind, it's one of the biggest markers of sort of your future potential is, the non-cognitive pieces. Like, can you communicate? Do you really have high agency? Do you have self-efficacy? All of those sorts of things. So we built what we call the Glide Nudge Challenge framework, where we really wanted to focus in on just friction, removing friction early on, because that is just so fundamental. And making things like easy, making them familiar, making them emotionally resonant, just beautiful, making them aesthetically appealing, all of those sorts of things. And so we just started very small. Like, we started making little tweaks here and there. We were finding that these little tweaks were having enough of an impact that it sort of started snowballing over time. So because we were able to do so much in the sandbox environment, and it was I will say it was a lot of duct tape, and we had these advisors who could try tactics. Like, we could scale or we could try more things because we actually had so much human involvement.
Yeah.
I feel like the bigger piece was making the decision to invest in the non-corporate environment, which is where we get 1 million people into the pipeline every year, because that was really about trying to automate and build things at scale and really build digital platforms that are aligned to these concepts. So because we were able to actually use this corporate program to see incremental growth, and then at one point we hit like 1,000 graduates, and then we hit 2,000 graduates, and then we saw persistence triple. So we were able to build this case over the course of a year where it's like, wow, loss aversion, for example. So if you're in the corporate program, you have sort of a weekly study requirement. Like, you need to stay engaged, because GED participation is very often episodic for people. They're on and off, in and out. And so we wanted to ensure that people were really consistently sticking with it, so that they didn't lose the material that they were learning, and also build momentum. And so with that, we had originally framed it as like this thing to gain. You can gain your high school diploma. You can use this as a way to help get a promotion, all of those sorts of things. It was very aspirational. And then we did an experiment where we said, okay, everybody who comes into the program is now a student. So before they were in this program, they were somebody who didn't have a high school diploma, but now they have the label and identity of a student. And then if you want to stay a student in this program, you need to keep up with the weekly study, your weekly homework, and your weekly study requirements. And if you don't, you lose your student status, you lose your eligibility. It's the same thing. But that reframing it as the identity piece and the potential loss of identity was incredible. It was incredible how many people felt like, I got to do this. I need to be a student. My mom wants me to be, I need to do this. I mean, it's stuff like that where I just felt like, holy moly, this seems, I can't even explain this, like, I mean, the research says this would work. It works, which is great. But when you explain it to somebody, they just, In fact, if anything, people will hear loss and they'll think, that doesn't sound like a nice way to frame things to your customer, right? It sounds kind of mean.
Yeah.
But you went from removing the friction to doing all these things to make it easy. You made it attractive. There's but now you're bringing it into sort of a social side, and you're saying you're identified as a student. You are a student now, and you risk losing this. Like the nudge is just a beautiful. It certainly is playing to loss aversion, but it's starting to kind of play on this growing new sense of self schema and self identity that they're just growing in, to say you could lose this precious little thing that you've come to grasp. That's terrific.
And I think there's an interesting piece on that, because there's the loss aversion side of it, but then you also get into this, this hyperbolic discounting component where the gain is so far out in the future, where that loss of my identity is an immediate component. So you're no longer having to get people to envision a year or 6 months even, down the road. This is an immediate response. And so that visceral element, that emotional component, not doubles down on that loss aversion component. So fantastic.
Yeah.
Those are cool.
Yeah. And on that hyperbolic discounting, we've definitely taken the model that to reward the effort, not the outcome, because you're right, the outcome is so far away. And so just the sheer act of showing up this week and doing it this week is something to be proud of. And, we've been using streaks and trying to do novelty, like even in texts, like, a cute little text picture, just something that's unexpected that sort of just reminds you that you have made the effort and to take note of that.
So you had this testing lab of the corporate component that you were able to run some mini experiments on, almost to a way of thinking about it. And now you're incorporating some of that into the larger mainstay GED program. Have you seen similar results in what you're doing there, or has it been too early? Where are you at in that?
We've seen really good results, but I will say it's humbling. I mean, I've heard this before I started any of this work. I've heard many people say, wait a second, just know that you're not going to get it right the first time. Mm-hmm. So we had gone through this corporate program and we had done our strategic prioritization for 2018 and where are we going to spend our investment our money. And we decided this was a big area of focus. We were going to change, for those 1 million people who come in, we're going to overhaul this process and make it, easy and aesthetic and incorporate nudges and all those sorts of things. And we use lean innovation. So we went into it with a very sort of thoughtful, experiment our way to what's going to work. Rapid experimentation models. And we did a lot of we did all these Google design sprints, and we did all these sessions where we were doing, getting qualitative feedback and iterating until we felt like we had something we should really start building with our engineering team. And then we did all of this work, and then we finally launched, we did an A/B experiment where we had the old experience and then this new baseline experience that we gave to 10% of the population. And we had done all the right things. We had consulted the research. We had used everything we learned from the corporate program, rapid experimentation, it's like buzzword bingo. We did everything. And we launched it. And then we needed the data to cure. We needed 3-6 weeks for the data to cure. And then I was sort of the team, I think, didn't even want me to see the metrics. They were just wait, you just need to we needed to be statistically significant. I'm one of those, I was the executive, hey, let me in the data. And they're no, just let's just wait. And then we got the data back after I kid you not, a year of planning and from this time that we started getting the investment to the time that we delivered is maybe not a year, maybe 8 months. And the data was the same. The old experience and the new experience were the same. There was no difference. And I was floored because I'm a humble person, but I really believe we had done all the right things. And so we went back and we have a lean innovation consultant who we work with, and he was like, wait a second, why did you do X, Y, and Z? What about this? And so we made tweaks again that seemed so inconsequential. We made these tweaks to let the data cure again, and then we saw a 20% jump in conversions. And again, to me, it's art and science and maybe a little bit of magic. Yeah. I don't know. oh. But that was amazing. And that was something where we're like, okay, yes, this is working the way this is moving directionally in the way that we expected. And then now we're just sort of in a cadence of doing more and more experiments. So right now we're doing some like, intention setting experiments around goal setting and trying to be really concrete about like, sort of what and when and where are you going to be. I don't know if you've seen the WOOP model, the wish, outcome, obstacle plan. Yeah. So experimenting with things like that. So we've seen, I would say maybe the net point is a 20% growth in conversion relatively quickly, but enough anxiety and indigestion for the version before that of like, really?
I think Tim and I have seen this too with corporate clients who are looking to say, well, what did you do over at company B? And let's put that in at our company because obviously it was successful over there. And now we just want to replicate it here. And every time I always am very cautious about that, saying, yeah, we have the underlying bones to it, but it's going to be different here. And to your part, it's art, science, and a wee bit of magic dust on it, right? And you need to tweak those things. And sometimes, you are in a good position where you got the data and you were still able to tweak. Whereas sometimes I think too often corporate organizations may just get that initial result and go, see, the naysayers that, were begrudgingly did this say, look, it didn't work, therefore, and they just discount it without going that next step or maybe even the next step after that. And so it's a good lesson, I think, for all of us to learn is that it's not just cookie cutter. You can't just cook here and there, and what worked in a corporate environment, you might need to tweak for the general environment, and what worked at corporate A doesn't always work at corporate B.
Well, you also talked about nature and nurture, right? It's not nature versus nurture, it's really both, right? So we may know that loss aversion is a powerful tool. We may know that all these biases that we talk about all the time are present, but how you apply them has to do with the environment, has to do with the nurturing side, right? So they're baked into our human condition, but how we apply them does change from situation to situation. And what I so applaud and what you and your team are doing, Sarita, is you're continuing to tweak, you're continuing to play with how do we apply these in these situations, right? And that's really terrific. Just out of curiosity, I'm just curious, after you get the data and you realize that the old and the new are basically identical, what can I ask? What were the couple of tweaks that all of a sudden increased the adoption rate by 20%?
So we had, we are sort of like we're retrofitting guesses. So we saw the data, now we just have guesses as to why that changed. One of the things we did was so when people came in, they had this brand new, beautiful look and feel, and sort of like the things that we really focus on people's mental models. What are the first questions they have when they first come into the GED world? And we really position those high, and we try to give an overview of like, what does this journey look like? The tweak that our lean innovation consultant suggested is if you have people who come in and they just want to go get started on their GED testing, maybe they've already been in class, maybe they're just ready to go for whatever reason, just ask them what they're here to do first before you inundate them with all of these like practice questions, see life and see stories. And, because it's very, very rich content, which is great. But some people, that's distracting. And, sort of one of the key rules of thumb in application development is don't distract your user. Like, what are they here to do? Let them do that thing. Yeah. In our research, we identified four persona mindsets. And one of them we call the determined mindset. These are people who are going to come in and they're just going to do it. For whatever reason, they have really high intrinsic motivation and relatively high self-efficacy. And so for those people, we don't want to slow them down. And we knew going into this that we had our goal, the people who are going to do it are going to do it. So don't slow them down and focus on these other three mindsets, these other three personas who want it and see value in it, but are having different kinds of struggles about, or not maybe conscious struggles, but unconscious struggles about, what they need to do and when they need to do it. And so just that switch, what are you here to do today? that was probably the single most influential thing. Like that's what allowed us to let the people who were here to move, let them just move, don't stop them, and then convert the people who weren't really sure what they wanted to do.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
Yeah, going from explain or this is how to build the watch to all I want to know is the time.
Yes.
You know, that's absolutely brilliant. That really is.
All right.
Terrific.
So Sarita, you got me interested. We have a determined mindset or persona. What are the other three that you've found?
Yes, definitely.
Now I'm just sitting here going, okay, what could these be?
Yep, I want to hear.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
The next mindset is the family go-to.
Okay.
Demographically, these are often women. They're often moms, and they're often caregivers, and they tend to have, again, really high self-efficacy. They're often the hubs of their family. In our ethnographic research, I met multiple women who didn't finish high school and had siblings with master's degrees or had their own businesses. And they felt like their role in the family was to support their siblings. Like, my sister has her master's degree, but her life is really tough. She really needs my help. And so being this emotional supporter and just sort of tasky kind of supporter too, and they often help with multiple generations. They help with their parents, their siblings, their own children. And so there's this very strong sense of that, like, my role in life is to help other people. And it feels very, it feels like selfish for me to actually focus on my own education when, other people need my time. And so that's a tough mindset, because it's this, because they are really valuable to their families and they are really capable, and they see their role as role models. Like, they see that, particularly for their children, like, how do you hold your children to this standard when you yourself haven't finished? And they see that. And so with that group, we've learned that there's a lot in just like social support. So being the combination of what are other people doing, and then also how do other people see me?
Mm-hmm.
So that's we call that the family go-to.
Okay.
The next one is the Disheartened, and this is that presumptive failure group that I mentioned earlier. These are people who, again, are often intellectually really capable, but their beliefs are the things that really impede them. And again, we've met so many people who, like, just in the process of going through studying and seeing that they are capable, like, what a transformation it's been, like how you feel at the end of this versus how you feel at the beginning. Just that sense of pride and accomplishment and capability and the future. Like, oh my gosh, I really do have control over my future. And then the fourth group is, I think, maybe more of the stereotype. That's what we call the here and now. And this is people, they often tend to be young, and they're often people who are just actually extremely capable, but they don't necessarily see a need for education. They think that there might be other paths. Very often they want to be entrepreneurs or start their own businesses. And one thing that we've seen over and over is that if you're in this here and now persona, that, if you're 18 and you have a car and you have a great job and you're making money and all these things, and your friends go off to college, those suckers go off to college and they're not making any money and they're poor. But then at a certain point they graduate and now they're making real money, and then they're doing better than you, and you see this gap. And that can be something that's really influential in moving people. Yeah. We also learned that those mindsets, that people can move from one mindset to another. And one of my favorite stories was this young man named Joseph. Joseph was a here and now person. Like, he's living in his mom's basement, and his mom was like, come on, you're capable of so much more. Go out, get your diploma, and like, you can do so much more than this. And Joseph was like, I have enough money for beer and for pot. I have a place to stay. I'm good. And so one day he's out walking and he trips over somebody, and he's like, looks down and he sees this guy that he knows from the neighborhood. And he goes to shake him. He's like, sorry, man. And he realizes that the man that he tripped over had passed away. And Joseph was like, he saw his future. Like, he was telling us, like, this is an incredible storyteller. And he was telling us that, like, he just, it's like the ghost of Christmas future. Like, it just,
oh my gosh,
this is what's going to happen to me. And then he immediately enrolled in classes. He went to his local adult education center. And he passed because he was a really smart guy. He actually earned college credit because you can actually earn college credit with the GED. Yeah, I mean, you know, it was amazing. It was an amazing story. So those personas I think that's another big area for us to explore, is how do we make sure that the messaging and the tactics are really honed to maybe somebody's mindset.
It's interesting because it obviously that event triggered that transformation, had an emotional response inside of them. And I know, at least in the work that I've done, that emotional response, it's vital to getting people to sustain change and kind of keep things moving. But oftentimes it is those happenstance components that trigger that. And so it's hard to manufacture.
Yes.
Which is tough, because if you got that moment, that person, he had the intelligence, and he just needed that little push, or the little nudge, or push instead of a nudge instead of push. But you can't manufacture those all the time.
That's exactly right. Like, if somebody could figure that out, that's like $1 billion business. Like,
yeah.
How do you do a Ghost of Christmas? You could call a business Ghost of Christmas Future, and you could.
There you go. We got something. We'll work on this. All right.
I like that. So, I'm going to write that one down.
We'll include you in, Sarita, as we brainstorm this. We'll get this going. So, yes. And with that, Tim, I'm sure you are dying right now, and Sarita and I are both trembling, because it's that time when you always start to talk about some musical element, and being in Nashville as you are, you probably are primed to talk about music.
Well, definitely. This isn't just like casually listening. This is a place where people are listening to music here in Nashville, which for me is wonderful. But Sarita, in the time that I've known you, you are one of the most intense, and I mean that in such a positive way, by the way, but you have such intensity and passion in your life. And so I'm wondering, is there any music in your life that either primes your intensity or primes you to get away? I know you're a yoga practitioner, and do you use music as a way to pull yourself away from the passion and the intensity, or to move toward it? Just curious.
I think both. I think that's gosh, what a great question. That is not the question I anticipated. Asked me what's my theme song, and I was so embarrassed. Okay. Yeah, for both, I think. I love a really broad assortment of music. Like, for me right now, like, if I'm just like needing to like sort of stew an emotion, I listen to Lemonade by Beyonce, which I think is a masterpiece. But there are many times when I'm just blue and I just need to be upbeat. I just need that little bit of, if it's too late for caffeine, so I'll put on like New Order or something like that. And then sometimes just to sort of wind myself down. Like like if I'm going to give a big presentation, I've been listening to Vampire Weekend, Modern Vampires of the City. I think that's the album. That if you haven't listened to that album, it is so beautiful. The name is not great. I think the vampire name is a little overdone, but it's so beautiful. Cool. So all of those things, I feel like for me, it's better than meditation for me, because it just it can transport me within like 2 or 3 minutes. It can kind of get me to where I want to be.
Yeah. Isn't that fabulous? See, that to me is why I love the musical side of me, because you see that music has this can have this instantaneous effect on people.
Yes.
Yeah. And the music, I mean, New Order and Vampire Weekend, both of those are very emotive bands. And so as you're thinking about that, and it's interesting because Tim and I have had these conversations before, and I tend to gravitate to that type of music as well. And then I go off even, if I need to grind and get in, I go even deeper on some of the really
you go a lot deeper on that.
Like, who's that?
Yeah, that's some industrial kind of, headbanging stuff from back when I was in high school, and still listen to every once in a while.
Like 9 Inch Nails, that kind of stuff?
9 Inch Nails, My Life with Thrill Kill Cult, again, these names of bands that sometimes you go, yeah, all right, but they're representative sometimes, So anyway, music has that ability, and I think you have, identified that get you there quickly, which I think is one of the values of it. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's terrific. Sarita, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on Behavioral Groups. We thank you for your time today.
Thank you for the work you've done. I mean, the stuff you're doing with this, I think, is, it goes beyond making some, profit better for some company. You are changing people's lives. And so that's just, it blows me away that people, do this and you're doing a great job. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
And thank you guys. And then I just want to really thank you guys for building this community in the Twin Cities, and it sounds like all over the country. So I really appreciate that. I suspect that running this does the opposite for your net worth that you would want it to do, at least in the and so I would say the same thing. Like, I really appreciate that you're putting your time and your passion into this. It's wonderful.
It's our fun spot, so we enjoy it. So thank you.